Good. Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Stephen Kahmann. I'm the co-founder of Crown Point Technologies. We're a consulting company that focuses on implementing knowledge graphs for a variety of different customers. I'm excited to be here today to talk about applied ontology for semantic layer and biopharmaceutical manufacturing as a business use case. How many people here are familiar with biopharmaceutical manufacturing? Anybody? One. Not many people. All right. How many people like beer? Drink beer? Huh? More people? All right. That's what I thought. All right. So beer making is actually a form of biotech, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. So you guys are basically biopharma experts. You already know what's going on. But today I'm going to be talking about what is biopharmaceutical manufacturing and why is it important. But also, what are some of the current challenges in digital manufacturing and in data management related to biopharmaceutical manufacturing? And then what is a semantic layer? What is the semantic layer we're talking about? I'm sure many of you know or have heard about it already. And how can we apply that to biopharmaceutical manufacturing? So we're talking about beer first. We want to explain how biopharmaceutical manufacturing works. And the process involved in biomanufacturing is really important here. In terms of the challenges related to the process. So making beer is actually relatively simple. You take some grains, you soak them in water to release sugars, you add some hops and you brew them to create some flavor. And then most importantly, you add yeast. Yeast is a single-celled organism that can convert the sugar in beer to alcohol and CO2, and you ferment that. And then you generate your beer, you generate the alcohol, you filter it out, you bottle it. And then we drink it at the happy hour tonight. And so this is very similar to the process of biopharmaceutical manufacturing, although biopharmaceutical manufacturing is a little bit more complex and quite a bit more expensive. Same basic steps. We're starting with cells. We're developing cells. We put them into a bioreactor, just like you do when you ferment yeast for beer, to grow those cells and generate the product that you're interested in. That's called upstream processing. We then take that product and we filter it and purify it through a bunch of different steps to generate the actual drug product that we're looking for. And really in biopharmaceuticals, what we're really trying to do is create medicines from these living organisms like yeast or microbes or other things like mammalian cells. This is typically done using batch manufacturing or sometimes continuous manufacturing. It's a very labor and time intensive process. So the process of creating a biopharmaceutical product can take weeks to grow these cells in a bioreactor and then filter it down. It's also very expensive and takes a lot of time. And so what the pharmaceutical companies are trying to do is trying to optimize the process to produce the highest quality product that they can with the highest efficiency and highest throughput. And so what these companies have tried to do in the pharmaceutical space, really in other manufacturing spaces as well, is to apply digital tools and digital transformation to improve this process. Biopharma is no different. And what we're trying to do is get more value out of the data that we have to produce the best quality product with high efficiency and throughput. And this has already been happening. So digital transformation is not new. It's been in place for several years now. Different types of technologies like paperless processes and automation and advanced analytics are already in place. And of course, organizations need to rethink how they're working with data technologies and with their data to be able to better collect and process and analyze data to get this value. But they also need to rethink culturally how they're working with data, how they're organizing it, modeling it, and understanding it. And that's where the ontology and semantic layer comes into play. So I want to take us through a couple of slides that talk about some of the challenges specific to biopharmaceutical manufacturing. And I think you'll see that a lot of these challenges exist in many other domains and applications as well. What we're looking at here are some of the common data systems that exist in biopharma. And this is as a result of digital transformation. This was originally a very paper-based and still in some cases a very paper-based intensive process, but many different tools like ERP systems for managing inventory and materials and equipment, LIMS and ELN systems, electronic lab notebooks, for managing experimental data and results data have been implemented, and MES and historian systems for controlling equipment in the process and collecting data from the process have all been implemented. These are digital tools that are using modern databases to collect and manage data. And so you might wonder, what is still left to do, right? We already have a lot of these tools in place. And when we get to that analytical layer, that's where things really start to fall apart. So integrating all of this data for analysis is extremely difficult. It's a very manual process, and many times it takes weeks, if not months, to pull this data together in a way that the process engineers and scientists need to generate the reports and get the results they need for trending or prediction or root cause analysis. So data integration is really the big problem here. Many companies are starting to deploy integrated platforms. So they're taking one platform from one vendor and deploying that because they get better integration of the different tools and services for that. But the problem with that is you have vendor lock-in, you have proprietary data systems, you still will need to integrate it with external tools, and there are challenges there. And the problems get even worse when we look at how biopharma is typically done, how the process is developed and scaled up over time. Typically, you start in the lab and you build experiments and you try to build out a certain process in a laboratory setting, and the goal is to scale that up through pilot and production scales. This is generating a lot of data, and it's really, really difficult to integrate this data across those different scales. This is really the key value proposition of the semantic layer. There are not a lot of tools that can do this right now, and the problem with these organizations is even though they might have certain vendors and certain integrated platforms at specific sites, when you go across scales and sites, that completely breaks down. And so what happens is these process engineers spend at least 2 to 4 weeks using Excel to manually bring this data together so that they can generate some sort of analysis on their data. And it's just not working for them. It takes too long, it's too expensive. And so what we need is some sort of technology that can bring this data together automatically. And that's really what the semantic layer provides. And we're using ontologies and knowledge graph technology to implement that. So semantic layers is not a new concept. It's been around for a little while. There's different products and tools that can implement semantic layers. So what we feel, these are some of the characteristics of a semantic layer that we feel are very important for implementing an approach like this, especially in the biopharmaceutical space. And so when we look at a semantic layer, we're really focused on making data meaningful, understanding what data we have, where it is, and how it's connected. But we want to do that using open standards for interoperability and flexibility. So we are using open standard ontologies to integrate this data. We're actually partnering with some organizations to build those for the industry. We'll talk about that in a few slides. But we also need to be able to integrate data regardless of where it's coming from, regardless of the data source, regardless of the data format. As I mentioned before, these organizations have dozens of different vendors and tools and data formats, and there's really no way right now to bring all that data together. We also need to be able to virtualize data as well as materialize it. So we want to materialize it in one place for high performance analytics, but we need the capability to virtualize it, access data where it lives and where it's created for better data management practices, security, and for performance in many cases. We, of course, also need to be able to adapt to changing requirements, changing data requirements, and, of course, changing business requirements. And we need the flexibility to be able to switch out what data systems we're using, what data formats we're using, be able to do that through a configuration-based approach, so we're not hard coding and writing a lot of software to do this manually all the time. And then finally, we of course need to be able to discover relationships and infer meaning between data sets. This is really the key behind a semantic layer and a semantic approach. And what we're showing here in this view is that a semantic layer really represents an overlay technology sitting on top of your existing data systems. So this would be data lakes and data warehouses, databases, the ERP systems, ELN systems, MES systems I was mentioning, so all your manufacturing systems. And this is across multiple sites. And the idea being to integrate this data together in a configuration-based approach based on ontologies, and be able to grow that organically over time. So you may start with 1 or 2 use cases at the beginning, and you need a system that's flexible enough to add new use cases on demand when you need them. So unsurprisingly, we're at a knowledge graph conference. We're using ontologies and knowledge graphs to implement this semantic layer. And these open standard technologies, W3C based, are what we're using to understand the data that we have in our systems and then represent it as knowledge so that we can do better analysis on that data. So many of you may be familiar with an ontology. In fact, it's a word that's being used a lot more often recently and in many different contexts. So I want to define what we mean by an ontology. And what we mean is it's a mechanism for representing knowledge about things and attributes and relationships. Of course, it's a knowledge model, but it's something that's designed regardless and without really input, in many cases, from the data system. So it's a conceptual model that's independent of whatever vendor and data platform that you're using. But it is based on open standards. So we use the web ontology language. We're building ontologies using OWL to model the biopharmaceutical process and make that available for different pharmaceutical companies and for the industry. And concretely, an ontology really is a hierarchy of terms and definitions, as well as relationships between those terms that form a graph. And so what benefits do we get from applying an ontology in a semantic layer? Well, the first one is really just a consistent use of terms. So this may seem relatively simple, but this is really critical for most organizations, especially when you look across organizations and within a community or an industry. The consistent use of terms, being able to speak the same language, is critical for doing things like regulatory reporting, even internal reporting and analytics. We can also build on this to do schema alignment, integration of data across the different data systems within your organization. So ontologies enable better mapping of data across these different data systems to support better analytics. And these can drive better user experience. So I'll show either in the next slide or one of the future ones here, that we can use the ontology to drive access to the data. These business users, these process scientists, they're helping us build these ontologies using their language, their consistent set of terms. And we want them to be able to access data and analyze data using those terms, which just leads to a better user experience and better results. And so we can bring all of these benefits together using ontologies to create better semantic interoperability within the biopharmaceutical space, but really more broadly than that as well into manufacturing applications. And this is what powers the semantic layer. So how do we build it? How do we deploy it? How do knowledge graphs fit in? And then what's the data flow look like? I didn't specify any particular products here, but in terms of a reference architecture, this is typically how we're building these types of solutions. We can see on the bottom, we have data sources. These are those ERP systems, those manufacturing systems. We're using ontologies to drive data mappings into the knowledge graph. So that makes them open and standards-based, and it makes them reusable and very flexible to change. So as we add new data sources for new use cases, or we're swapping out data sources because it's a change in the vendor that's providing it, we can easily update these since they're all configuration-driven based on the ontology. And when we map that data in, we're forming a knowledge graph, a connected network of nodes and objects related to, in this case, biopharmaceutical manufacturing. And this is, again, independent and sort of a seamless layer sitting on top of all these different data systems. And we're using the ontology to drive access to data. So again, the users are asking questions running analytics based on terms and knowledge models that they helped build, regardless of whatever format the data system is sitting in under the covers. Now, we started with a set of specific use cases that were really high-value use cases within biopharmaceutical manufacturing. And these use cases represent very challenging data problems within biotech that are really focused around data integration. And so these three use cases that I'm highlighting here were actually developed through a consortium of pharmaceutical organizations. We developed an ontology to actually implement these use cases with some knowledge graph technology. So the first one is process monitoring, and this is really focused around managing data for a specific batch run. So tracking all the sample data, the process data associated with that run, primarily focusing on process parameters, performance indicators, and quality attributes, which are key to regulatory reporting and process design within biopharma. We built on top of that comparative analytics or comparative analysis. This is really an answer to that challenge I showed earlier, where we had the different sites and scales. You're trying to aggregate and analyze data from experimental to pilot to production scale systems. And so we want to be able to aggregate batch run data and be able to ask questions like, how do my pH levels vary between my experimental runs and my production runs? How does that affect my product quality, and which quality attributes are affected the most? You have to be able to integrate data across these systems to do that. And right now, you can't do that with the systems that we see currently in place within these organizations. And then finally, the raw material impact was the third use case that we implemented. And this is adding material data to the process information so that we can track the lineage of raw materials, process intermediates, and final products along the entire chain of pharmaceutical production. And this is end-to-end, from cell line development to upstream processing all the way through the end of downstream processing. And process engineers may be asking, which raw materials were used to create the cell media or the media for the cell culture step within a specific batch run, right? So they're asking this question based on their understanding of the data, based on what we've developed in the ontology. This actually could link together well with things like ChatGPT, although we haven't included that yet. But we also, after implementing these three, worked with pharmaceutical organizations to look at future use cases. So where can we go from here? And supply chain analytics, one-click tech transfer, quality investigations for things like root cause analysis, and compliance and reporting are future use cases that we're going to implement. So we were working with a consortium called the National Institute for Innovation in Manufacturing of Biopharmaceuticals. It's a lot of words, so we can just call it NIMBLE. NIMBLE is an organization that includes several different large pharmaceutical organizations and academic groups that are interested in improving biopharmaceutical manufacturing. One project that we're working with them on is around standardization of data models and data within biopharma. And the project was to build a core ontology for biopharmaceutical manufacturing. What I'm showing here is sort of a high-level abstract view of the ontology. And really, we modeled two different areas within biopharma manufacturing. The first on the left-hand side in yellow are process specifications. So the different types of recipes, the process steps, the procedures involved in a manufacturing recipe, as well as the equipment you're using, the material you're using, are all modeled into the specifications or instructions for how the batches should be executed. And then on the right-hand side, we have in purple here, objects within the ontology that represent data that we're collecting from the batch runs. So this is process data. So you may make one process specification, you may run 100 batches of that process. You're collecting all the data for those batches, you're connecting them together, and then you're connecting them to the specifications. And this happens across scales. So now you can look at your experimental data, your pilot and production data, and see how the trending and prediction is actually working across all of those different data sources. I'm showing here some of the results. We actually partnered with a large pharma organization to build out a prototype of this. We actually used the Anzo platform to do that. On the left-hand side, we have a visualization of the ontology. This is the NIMBLE core ontology. So all those little nodes in there represent classes and object types within that model. On the right-hand side, we can see the results from that comparative analysis use case. So we were able to connect to their data systems and pull in data for specific quality attributes for several different batch runs. That's what each of these lines represent. And the colors of those lines represent the different process types. So we have small scale, pilot scale, and production scale data all brought together into one graph, into one visualization. And this large pharma organization told us they've never been able to do this before in an automated way. So we were able to automate this entire process so that they can ask any question they want over any of these batch runs across all of those scales. So that was a real game changer for them. Just a couple more slides. I think I'm about out of time here. The approach that we've taken here with ontologies and knowledge graph are not specific to biopharmaceutical manufacturing. In fact, the ontology that we've built, we feel can also be applied to other types of manufacturing in aerospace or automotive, or other digital twin and digital thread use cases like model-based system engineering or early R&D or predictive maintenance. We've also applied these approaches in the defense and intel space. So very flexible and adaptable approach, and really offers a great start in the biopharma space, but manufacturing in general. And so in summary, what we've been able to show is really a demonstration of how ontologies and knowledge graphs can improve product quality, process efficiency, and throughput. And if you're interested in learning how your organization or organizations you represent can get involved or apply these techniques, feel free to reach out to me. My email is there on the slide and our website. If you're interested in industry groups that are actually implementing this now, you can, of course, talk with Nimble, the ones that we worked with to build that core ontology, as well as the IOF, Industrial Ontologies Foundry, which is building ontologies for industrial applications. And I have a few more minutes for questions if anybody has any.
Sure, this is a great talk. I mean, you definitely, we were focused on the manufacturing side, but of course, the pre-approval and the clinical trials, aspect of all of this is important too. And a lot of the language would be shared between those earlier steps and the manufacturing steps. So are you working with these groups as well to sort of backdate that and use these ontologies for their earlier processes?
Yes, absolutely we are. So we're working in the clinical space. We're working in product research and development. We're working in the IDMP space for regulatory submissions. So we're working in all these spaces. And what we found is that the ontology really gives you, or the ontology approach, right, gives you the ability to define these different types of information from these different systems and how they connect across these domains. So if you're trying to do analytics across clinical and manufacturing, for example, this type of approach makes it much, much easier to do so. So we're definitely working with them. Nimble is just focused on biomanufacturing, so they're not focused outside of that scope. But extending from IOF and actually extending from the basic formal ontology gives us sort of the foundation for extending these ontologies into other domains. Any other questions? Yeah.
Picking up from that point, also our conversation this morning, one of the things that's a little bit of a paucity in the life science ontologies is around processes, is around the occurrence. And so is this something that you were able to leverage the Industrial Ontologies Foundry IOF quite a bit for that? Or do you have to build a ton?
Yeah, we were. So most of the stuff over here is occurrence, so processes. So batch process is an occurrent. For those of you not familiar with basic formal ontology, occurrent is something that occurs in time. I don't have the actual definition, but
it's an event.
It's an event. So every sort of process we're tracking in here, these all extend from BFO. IOF actually gives us a number of different processes to start with. So they have things like manufacturing process, packaging process, things like that we're extending.
Okay, so you did get a decent foundation to start.
We do, yeah. And everything on the left-hand side is all plan specifications. So these are information content entities from IOF, things like that.
What was the data quality like when you were bringing it from different sources?
The data quality? How are we approaching that? How are we managing that?
Was it relatively clean and standard?
Oh, how was the data quality in our prototype? It was not great. So what we found is, you're always going to have challenges, right, with these systems, whether you're pulling from some Excel spreadsheets that somebody's kind of cobbled together, or if you're actually pulling from the production systems. All these different vendors have all these different formats and their own way of sort of structuring the data. But even within those, each organization sort of implements those systems in their own kind of custom way. And so you need to be able to work with process experts to understand how data is stored and managed within these systems, how that relates to the ontology, and then make sure we get the mappings right within whatever knowledge graph technology is being implemented. So the quality is really important. It's important to have good tools to be able to manage that. And you're going to have a lot of issues, but can't really get around that. But this does help with that once we can figure out the mappings. Any other questions? I think we have time for one more. Yeah.
Maybe it's like around kind of like the process for how you develop the ontology, but I was just wondering, there's like a lot of ways that you can represent information. Did you have any like particular approaches that you used to help scope or neck down like what categories you picked where in this?
We did, yeah. So I showed some of these here. We have much more complex use case descriptions than this abstraction here. We worked with the pharmaceutical companies to determine what are those high value use cases. So that was sort of the benefit of working with an organization like Nimble, is we were able to get all these people in the same room, same Zoom call, and be able to talk through, what's really important to them. And we used these to really focus in on what elements of the manufacturing process do we really need to track. So, there's certain elements of the end-to-end that are very mature that we've tracked for these use cases. And there's plenty of other modules that we have not fully developed out yet that, given future use cases, we'll be able to extend on.
Oh, I got you. Okay, so you use the use cases to actually drive.
Use case-driven approach, that's the way to go. Yep.
Okay.
So that's one of the benefits of the ontology approach. It's very flexible. So over time, we can add more use cases, flesh out different parts of the ontology. And then where it's implemented, we can actually update those implementations much easier as well.
Cool.
Mm-hmm. All right, great. Thanks, everybody. Maybe they'll have a video.